residents of Woodsboro, and welcome to Circuit Court Entertainment, where we discuss how laws and history affect all forms of media. I'm your host, Mina, and today we're heading farther into the haunting season of Halloween with a rather fun discussion involving mixed licenses. This is the story of Scream's Ghostface mask. Let's get started. Scream is a 1996 slasher mystery written by Kevin Williamson and directed by Wes Craven of The Nightmare on Elm Street and cult classics like The Hills Have Eyes or The People Under the Stairs fame. The story follows our final girl, Sydney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell. It is a year after her mother's murder and someone is targeting the people around her. She must figure out who is killing them before she is the next victim. Also, as a heads up, while I won't spoil any of the reveals in this podcast, my sources will refer to or show the end of the movie complete with spoilers. The movie came out at the very tail end of the slasher genre's popularity. It is, as Cinefix explains, a horror subgenre defined by its rules more than themes and motifs. If you are into slashers, then it can be comforting. But that also means that over time it can grow stale. Especially as slashers, as we understand them, were first codified in Halloween, which came out in 1978, which means by the time Scream debuted, they had been running for almost 20 years. Most of the main output had shifted to cheap direct-to-video, and the box office releases were stuff like Halloween 6 and Jason Takes Manhattan. Halloween had one more film before it rebooted, and Jason was only holding on so New Line could make Freddy vs. Jason, which is a fascinating story in and of itself. That being said, Wes Craven had attempted to revitalize the slasher genre previously. Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out in 1994 and approached the first Nightmare on Elm Street in a more metatextual way. Namely, it's about the actors and creatives on the series dealing with fiction becoming reality. Nightmare's final girl, Nancy's actress Heather Langenkamp, is married with a kid and has started getting nightmares about Freddy Krueger. At the same time, Wes Craven, playing himself, has been writing scripts that either foreshadow or cause the future to happen, including the death of her husband. Robert Englund shows up and then disappears, leaving only a voicemail implying he is just waiting to be killed by Freddy, the character he himself's portrayed for years. Heather Langenkamp eventually realizes she has to trap an eldritch being that has taken the form of Craven's original idea for Freddy Krueger before it uses her son to return to the real world. Nowadays, this is what we would call a metatextual legasequel, in the vein of Top Gun Maverick and Ghostbusters Afterlife. But this was a newer concept back in the 90s, and with the Nightmare box office failing, it wasn't a bomb, but it did provide the close of the series, at least until Freddy vs. Jason, which was the actual end. Still, the genre needed another shakeup, and if that kind of meta wasn't the way to go, then maybe they could do it a different way. After all the kids in there would have grown up with watching horror movies too. So, with the themes and settings set up, it was time for them to film this. And while other slashers are the real world with some hand-waving, Scream was more solidly set up to work under real-world rules. Our killer, Ghostface, does get a reveal and characterization, but also a lot of equipment and so on are explained or at least justified. This is also a mystery after all, and a fair play one. They do lay out all the clues, though they are more obvious on a second viewing. And one of the clues and equipment pieces is the famous Ghostface mask. In universe, it's a clue that someone bought it, but with it being widely available, that didn't help out too much. Out of universe, well, that's where we begin. When the script was written, the antagonist was only called Ghostface, with no description. Nothing was really clicking until, while location scouting, they found a mask inside one of the houses. A face similar to the painting The Scream. It was pure white, surrounded by black fabric. They loved it, and it really helped pull the costume design together, because, as a mystery, using the costume to figure out sex, race, age, etc. would be a bit too easy. But, well, they didn't own the mask. So they set about making a legally distinct one, and while that did make it onto the movie for the first few filmed scenes, after a few days, the production crew had managed to track down the owner of the mask, a local company named Funworld, and properly licensed it for $100 and credit in the movie. Scream debuted in December and, against all odds, overcame a bad opening weekend on pure word of mouth. A mixture of it being a mystery and having the characters know how slashers work in general meant it proved a nice jolt to the genre, on top of it being just a really well-done slasher movie in general. The first 5 or 10 minutes is a really tense kill of Drew Barrymore's character, who had been used to promote the movie. She had signed on to play Sydney, but came up with the idea of her being the first victim herself, and it set the tone so well. Also, yes, you should see Scream. And looking at the success, Funworld, the company that made it, decided to do something very smart. They went back to their copyright and patents and altered it so it changed from what I believe was initially called a Father Death mask to a different name, Ghostface. The change put Funworld at least partially in charge of licensing for anything outside, which, well, very good for them. Ghostface's ubiquitousness in Halloween decorations can easily be attributed to that licensing. For one example, Scary Movie uses the mask or a variant pretty openly, and for another, I went to a restaurant recently that just had a giant inflatable ghost face in the middle of the place, and there were some other repercussions. On the bad side, there was 2015's Halloween Horror Nights. Put on by Universal Studios, it started off as a way to fill time and space during which rides were retooled. It started off as a more of a party, but with the ever-increasing popularity, there was a budget increase, and soon the appeal switched from the party atmosphere with parades and shows to going through scary mazes, where creatures jumped out at you to scare you. Well, there had almost always been at least one IP house. The second year had added in the people under the stairs, because they still had the sets after the movie was a surprise hit. The IPs were either minor, something Universal owned, or maybe done without the owners knowing. I've been keeping track of all known IP, and famous slashers were well known to show up, but under enough changes they could claim legally distinct, much like the original mask. This changed in 2007, when for the 17th Horror Nights, Universal properly reached out to the current owners of Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and Leatherface, New Line Cinema. Well, they had some stipulations. I remember hearing that for the opening ceremonies, the three couldn't share a space. It also brought a lot of attention, and Universal began to go after more prominent IPs, even ones they did not necessarily own. In HHN 25, people started to find references to the most recent entry into the slasher canon, Ghostface and Scream. However, things didn't turn out as planned. What we do know is pretty clear. A leaked commercial had Ghostface in it that was cut from the released commercial. Poking around the website did manage to dredge up an unused logo for the event that had Scream, and the yearly shirt that lists all the houses from that year on its back was missing both Scream and the house that seemed to have taken its stead. That house would be The Purge. Hypothetically based on the first movie, which was a home invasion flick, what people walked through didn't really look like that movie. It looked much more like Scream, or a bad attempt at covering it. The Drew Barrymore kill was just slightly modified. The garage scene was set up like it was missing a body, and several other scenes just had bare walls as all the decorations had been ripped out. It's even been reported that the knives used were Ghostface knives. As to why that happened is unclear. The most common guess is it had to do with the Scream TV show that the rights holders, Dimension Films, and MTV had debuted over that summer. One thing fans figured out very early on during promotions was that while the killer was a ghost face, the Funworld mask was not used. It also did not do very well. It debuted in 2015 to 1 million viewers, but it pretty quickly dropped. It ended in 2019 with only a third of that number. Part of that can be attributed to just not using anything from the movies, besides the mystery premise and the voice of Ghostface, Roger L. Jackson, who also voices Mojo Jojo. However, how that played for HHN is unknown. Either Universal started building assuming it was the movie and MTV tried to switch it to the TV show, or maybe the second license needed for the mask caused problems with the switch. No one is really talking, but it was obvious that something happened. As of right now, Ghostface has not been in any Halloween Horror Nights, even unofficially, since 2011. In better news, Dead by Daylight is a multiplayer horror game where 4 survivors have to try to escape from one killer. And for their 3rd anniversary in 2021, they gave a surprising announcement. The killer was Ghostface. But not any of the Ghostfaces from the movie. No, this Ghostface was to be fully original. And if you check the credit at the end of the trailer, only one name is given. Funworld, the company that makes the mask. As for the costume's popularity, I can't find numbers, but anecdotal evidence, basically me watching kids dress up on Halloween, or what's available to purchase in stores, has shown Ghostface has a consistent showing, both as a costume and an animatronic. It's now 2024, and the slasher genre is still in an interesting place. We've had both reboots and reimaginings, and we've had some new entries that have provided enough interest that it's given the genre some hope. But in the end, I don't think that this genre would exist anymore without Ghostface and the mask that started it all. Thank you for listening to Circuit Court Entertainment. If you found this episode interesting, please tell others as this is a new podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review on all the major podcast services. You can find me on Twitter at CCEPod and Tumblr at Circuit Court Entertainment. This episode was written, edited, and recorded by me, Mina. The script was edited by CJ Peterson. Podcast art by Empress Cirque on Twitter. Thank you for your time, and I hope to hear from you soon.